Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I am your host. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you are using. Thank you for those who have already done that. In today's episode, we will be discussing Project 2025, actually doing a bit of a deep dive into that and the ways in which we see it being implemented in just the first few weeks of the Trump presidency. And to do this, to have this great discussion over such a well-written, I can't even say it's well-written, on the document that we are examining. I'm joined by everybody is here, Blair, Wesley, and Julia. How are y'all doing today?
It is a wild time to be alive.
I will repeat, blah.
Yeah.
I apologize for doing that in your ears, listeners.
We give ourselves the worst homework.
But that is how I feel.
We did.
This is a...
But I'm doing okay.
We did. I think actually I want to start by saying a little bit about this, right? So I had asked my wife, I was like, oh, we're doing this next episode on Project 2025. And she didn't really know what it was. And I think this to me speaks a little bit to like how even people who are moderately informed about politics can have certain things kind of go over their heads because they're not like, they don't have the time or energy or interest to really do a deep dive into some of these kind of political nuance conversations. And so like with respect to the Democratic strategy, right? Like one of their main platforms when they were having campaigns was Project 2025. And either like she didn't see any of the advertisements or they didn't they never explained enough what it was for her to be like, oh, that's what this is. But I just thought that was that said something to me, right? I was like, there's something here that we have someone who's, educated, smart on social media to a certain extent, and that she didn't know what it was. I don't know, that it says something about the Democratic strategy and our inability to articulate just the danger of this document.
So let's get into it. Dr. Carter, what is Project 2025?
Oh,
and what homework did we assign ourselves?
What I will say is that I tried to suggest that it was well written, and it really isn't. And that's one of my critiques of it. But I want to go ahead and get over to it. So the Project 2025 really is called the Mandate for Leadership, written by the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation has been writing some version of this Mandate for Leadership since 1979. So this is the beginnings of the religious rights movement to elect Ronald Reagan. As you heard on a previous podcast, we found this to be somewhat ironic, given that Jimmy Carter was probably the most evangelical president we have had, Baptist, right, really one of their own, but was an evangelical who prioritized, one might say, the Beatitudes over the Ten Commandments.
In the sense of, I would say, little e evangelical. He
exactly.
Actually cares about the words and work of the gospel rather than the big E evangelical, which is denominational, institutionalist, and political.
Yeah. And I think if there's anything I want to say, I guess to start by framing this, is we should recognize how organized that the conservative and religious right are. Like there's a way in which they have a kind of organizational apparatus that, quite honestly, I'm envious of, because we don't have anything like this on the left.
It's easier when you prioritize hierarchical authority.
And it's easier when you're all homogenous and you all look, think, feel, move, and believe the exact same things.
Yeah. Absolutely correct.
I mean, it's easier, but it doesn't mean it's less important for the left to be organized, right? And I think this, again, gets to the point I even have of just the elected officials. Like our elected Democratic officials are not they are approving Trump cabinet members who should not be approved.
Let me tell you a thing that I've realized in the last, how many days has it been? 14 days? I don't even know how many days.
It feels like 2 years.
Yeah, honestly, it's too long.
16 or 17 days.
It's been horrible.
Taraji P. Henson mentioned Project 2025 on the BET Awards last year. And that's when people really started talking about it. And tell me why, even though they released this and we've known it, the Democratic Party had no plan of reaction and has been handling it one instance at a time. Like, I don't remember what it was, but it was like something happened. You know, we've just been living in chaos. And it was like, well, we're going to have a meeting next week at 1 p.m. And it's like, you haven't talked about this yet? Like, they already said that this is what they were going to do like 2 or 3 years ago. You knew it and you didn't think about what would happen when they did it until right now. This is why we lose. This is why we lose. And they are not going to save us. No politician is going to save us. We have to save ourselves. I digress. I yield back.
You use your time. No, but I think there's so much truth in that, in the sense that there does seem to be a lack of organized response to what is laid out in this document as a clear plan of action, right? That, like, in terms of one of the things that, again, thinking about when Barack Obama was president and they had all three branches of government between 2008 and 2010, Mitch McConnell was extremely organized to make sure that they knew how to defeat and just slow down the wheels
Obstruct.
of government so things couldn't get done. And it seems as though Democrats are unable to or unwilling to exert the same kind of power, right, as the minority party. Like, we don't actually have a resistant party right now. Like, they just seem to be they're working more cooperatively than they should, given the stakes that they claim to be making.
Well, I think that's
ahead,
because
Wesley.
Democrats see themselves more as like holding up institutions and not like trying to defend them.
Yeah.
And so I think they're definitely still relying on like the way things have been done. There's a sense of like camaraderie and sort of like collaboration that should be inherent in their work, and therefore, even if they're facing this like fascist regime, they're gonna try to cooperate because it's their responsibility to their voters to like try to make things happen. It's like, do something to protect people, and when you have power, use it to like make people's lives better instead of just making like small paltry changes, like minimal changes to the way that people interact with, you know, the material outcomes or the material conditions. It's a little frustrating, but at the same time, you know, what we had Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin as part of the Democratic Party. Like we have people who are aligned very differently with some of the overarching goals of like democratic systems and progressive ideas. And so it's just so much harder when you have like a big tent to get people to pull in the same direction. And that's just to say that there hasn't been like overwhelming unity in some actions. It's just we have a little more too many outliers doing their own thing.
It is harder when you have a big tent to have a unified oppositional party, but I think what makes it even more difficult, or I guess one might say what can make it easier, is if you had messengers within the party that could convey the actual threat and say this is the actual legitimate threat. And
I mean, we have them. We just don't listen to them.
But people don't want to listen.
Yeah,
people don't want to
fair.
listen because we've talked about this, that if the messenger is not a white man, will the people listen? So Jasmine Crockett and AOC speak the truth. Kamala Harris, we all told you. Everybody been said that this is what was going to happen, and look at us now. And at no point will any of these people look back and be like, wow, they were right.
No, because they're already
listen.
80, and by the time it matters, they won't be here with us anymore.
White privilege still gums up the works in a big tent too. And it's actually the primary source of why the Democratic Party can't move forward, is because, yes, we have not believed Black women and people of color in general about what is actually necessary for a thriving society, and because people like Nancy Pelosi refuse to retire and want to maintain their power. Anyway, guys, we've gotten this is all very important.
It is
but
important.
Also we got to get to the meat here.
Document.
Right. We got to get back to the meat.
It's like it's important for framing.
Putting my facilitator hat on.
Exactly.
We got to talk about the text in front of us.
So for those of you, we made ourselves read. I read a huge chunk of this, and it's 922 pages. I probably read 300. Yeah, I would say at least read a third.
That is commitment.
Well,
torture.
Yeah, it is torture. But this is because as an ethicist, I want to understand their argument to the best that I can, so I can actually make you'll find out some of the things that I actually do agree with what they say. I agree with how they want to fix it, but they have identified some clear problems. So the mandate really has 4 recommendations that they want to kind of use 4 pillars, if you will, that they say we need to repair to fix America's future. And the 4 pillars are, the first one is to restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children, is number 1. Number 2 is to dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Number 3 is defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And number 4 is secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. And so before we do too much of a deep dive into our thoughts about each one of these, as they are outlined in the Mandate for Leadership in Project 2025, I wanted to say at least one thing, I guess, to start conversation on why they chose these 4 as the pillars. Because one of the things that jumped out to me is the idea that the family is supposed to be the centerpiece of the American life and to protect our children, right? And you heard this with J.D. Vance in his arguments that there's something theologically or biblically aligned with saying the family is a centerpiece, which, again, this is actually a misinterpretation of Thomas Aquinas in his argument within a Roman Catholic tradition that centers the family. That's actually not what Aquinas is saying in Summa Contra Gentiles. See, this is the sound of someone who actually went to school, got a degree in it, and actually knows what it says. Like, that's not what it says. It doesn't say prioritize the family. It does say that you are responsible towards your family. But the way Aquinas is talking about family, it's not just the nuclear family. And I think this is the challenge. And this is what frustrates me about this from the beginning, is what they are setting out to do by centering the family is trying to say marriage is normative and singleness is not. They're trying to say that if people are in a committed relationship, but they are not married, that somehow these people are like a part of the problem and part of the reason why we have moral failure from their perspective in our country. And by centering the family, what you are doing is creating and promoting, I would argue, kind of individualist framework, because everybody looks at their family as their unique family, right? That doesn't create a culture of cooperation or community. That then the whole mandate goes on to talk about the importance of community. But I would find these 2 things as contradictory, to say we center the individual family and yet we want to foster community. What do y'all think about
this entire document? Is just contradiction. One line says one thing, the next line says the opposite thing. And I think the thing that is the most annoying about all of this, I know I jumped because I have a lot to say. Okay.
It's okay. Get in there, Julia.
Because this is crazy. These people are crazy. This is crazy. When they say restore the family, we all know that they are talking about a very specific type of family. And I feel like it's important. We have all of these phrases that they mention a lot of in this document, and we'll get to that. But before, I think that definitions are important. And I think that to me, this is a steaming pile of white supremacy. And I don't just mean that it's not that's not what I mean. I mean that there are untruths and presumptions about values and beliefs presented as fact. And a lot of the facts that he presents in this are just not true. They're just untruths. That's not true. And I'll point some out as we move on. But the values presented are very white, Western, Christian values, and they are presented as the norm, the only way of existing. Oh my,
Christian nationalist. Can we clarify?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they're grounded in the gospel and the teachings of Jesus Christ. I think they are Christian nationalists, which is utilizing the language and history and traditions of Christianity to further a nationalist agenda.
Which is, for the record, what actual blasphemy is. This Correct. Is actually taking the Lord's name in vain. This is what Scripture warns against.
And Dr. Carter made a point last week when we said we were going to do this, and we just started flipping through the document, and he's like, there's no footnotes. And you're right. There's not a single footnote. They do not cite their sources. This is not... Supposedly, PhDs wrote this project, and I tell you, if I turn this into my advisor, I would fail I would
Throw it
not
back in
earn
your
my
face.
PhD if I submitted this, because there is not a single footnote or citation to any of these beliefs or statements that they claim as fact. They cannot cite them
Because
to any
they're not
external
fact.
source, because they're created, they're manipulated, and they are formed to further their agenda, to be good, quick sound bites, and they do not actually move us forward.
I also don't know that it would matter if they had them. Like my experience of the conservative sort of like thinking is that it's not built on providing sources. Like it doesn't matter. And so it's incredibly frustrating because there were many times where I was like, where is this coming from? Like where
What
just
are you
point me.
That's
I'd love
what
to have an
footnotes tell you,
understanding.
What are you
right?
talking
Yes.
about?
That's what footnotes tell you, where it's
Something.
coming from. And if you don't provide footnotes, then the answer is it's coming from the inside of your brain, just your
Mhm.
brain.
Mhm.
And the fallacy in that is that one brain can speak universal truths for an entire country.
Right.
That's not how academia works. That's
Mhm.
not how religion works. That's not how our government works. And
Right.
so
But that's
there's like a fundamental flaw in the way in which this document's been assembled, in that it does not actually provide the necessary information for it to be legitimate beyond whoever wrote it. So this is neat. Okay, restore the family, whatever, all these 4 promises, that's fine. Do that for yourself,
Mhm.
but stop trying to apply it to the rest of the country when you haven't provided any evidence of why these are actually good pillars for everyone.
But that's the point, is that they believe in domination of white, straight, Christian nationalist, heterosexual men. So the reason that they don't feel that they need to he's like, I am the source.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get at. When you have the structure of hierarchy they have, sources aren't necessary because it's based upon a particular kind of hierarchy. And therefore, they do see themselves as having the moral authority to make these claims without having to have evidence to support the claims they're making. Second of all, I think one of the things that is evident in multiple spaces within this project is that they are not writing to persuade anyone that's not already conservative, to Wesley's point. Like they're writing to affirm the talking points and cultural assumptions of people who are already conservative, or people who have been raised around a kind of conservatism, so they can adopt, again, what Trump called common sense in his reflections on the helicopter crash, right? And his idea that DEI is at fault because it's common sense. Now, the last thing I'll say before we talk about the other pillar, which frustrated me, is there are, I think, 4 endnotes to the forward. And this
That's
is
it.
the thing
Yep.
that's interesting, is 4 endnotes. And the endnotes are really referencing sources that are within the conservative, like, window structure of what they've done. And those 4 endnotes aren't about any of the actual claims they make. Now, within the actual document, like when you get into the section on like the military, the White House is a section I actually want us to spend time talking about, because that's where you actually see them doing these things. They do provide footnotes, but then it's more tactical, right? When you get down to these other sections, the forward is setting the ideological framework, and that's what we really are diving into today on this podcast. The other sections are about when you appoint someone that's Secretary of Defense, they're supposed to look at the section written for the Secretary of Defense and then implement it. And that they do have footnotes in that, because they have really thought through how they want to go about subverting the bureaucracy of the federal government to actually accomplish their agenda. And so one thing that is clear in this document is that they are trying to be kings and not trying to govern, right? Like they think Trump is a king or operating from a kind of monarchy, if you will, and not actually to govern or persuade. And that, I think, is very, very scary. The other pillar that for me I want to just say a little bit about, just to get y'all's thoughts on, is number 4: secure our God-given individual rights to live freely. And I just thought, like, there is nothing in the Bible, there's nothing that's in Christian theology that says you have this God-given right to live freely. If anything, the actual mandate is that you actually have a God-given responsibility, like to care for your neighbor, to care for creation, to care for your family, to care for each other. Like we have, whether it be in the Hebrew Bible, in the Levitical codes, or in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, or in Paul's writing in Corinthians. Like there's over and over, there's a biblical theological mandate to care for your neighbor, to care for others. Nothing about this idea that you have this individual, like God-given individual right to live freely. Like that is not God-given. And they say it's God-given. And it's like they say it so much, people believe it without actually thinking, well, what does God, what does the Bible, what does the Christian theology actually say about this right that doesn't actually exist?
And I'm sure they're citing Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. But then the conservatives stop reading there. That's the problem. Because if you keep reading, this is a conversation about what one has to do to become part of the Christian community. And it's raising a question of circumcision. Do you have to change your body to be part of the Christian community? And Paul says, no. That used to be a rule. We used to have to conform to one another in order to be part of the community. And what the Pauline writer is saying in Galatians is, no, you are free to be whom you are and still belong to the love and grace of God in Christian community. So anyway, This is what happens when we read scripture together instead of by yourself and just decide you know what it means by yourself.
Yeah.
Dr. Carter, can we loop back? Because we said we were going to go through these in order.
Yeah, I want to start with promise number 1. I just wanted to at least talk about at least the challenges of the promises, like in terms of why pick these 4 and what are some of the structural flaws even of the picking the 4. But yeah, let's start with number one, which is restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children, right?
And I'll give us a quick summary of what they mean by that. They talk about the necessity for a 2-parent household, and they name supposedly the crisis of they claim 70% of Black children are being raised by unmarried mothers, which is just not like, I want to know where that number comes from because that sounds insane. That the government should not control the issues of the family crisis, that should be handled by a moral community, to get rid of marriage penalties in federal support programs. Then there's a whole lot of stuff about the quote unquote dangers of DEI, particularly related to sexual orientation and gender identity. There's a statement that pornography should be outlawed in its entirety, and a connection that critical race theory and gender ideology are the sources of pornography. And that anybody who furthers those things, like librarians or teachers or anyone else who works with children, should be labeled a sex offender. I have to take deep breaths even as I summarize. The importance to make sure that abortion is completely and totally outlawed across the entire country. And also, interestingly, that they name that Silicon Valley and social media is a plague on the United States, which I think maybe somebody missed when they were reading this, because all of the Silicon Valley billionaires were on the stage at the inauguration. But that's the little summary so that you don't have to read it. Tell me, my friends, what did this make?
Well, and I think that to the last point of the Silicon Valley, it's like that's why this is just nonsense. Like it's just something put forward to sort of like gain control and not really centered on the values or whatever the things that they're sort of proclaiming as central to their movement. Because you have Meta, you know Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, fully involved in this administration, and so. Yeah, you don't really care that Silicon Valley is whatever you're saying about smartphones, and articulating that Silicon Valley executives don't let their kids use smartphones. And so because of all these things, but then you put them in power, you give them access to things of the federal government. It's disingenuous, which we knew.
One of the lines is their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime, talking about social media. So it's definitely like,
and I don't disagree. Like, I think there's a lot of things that are wrong with social media. But if you really believe that they were at the root of these causes or at the root of these issues, then you wouldn't prioritize their participation in your government.
I think this is where we can look at how they are living according to the value of seeing Donald Trump as a ruler rather than a person that wants to use the government apparatus, because Trump made the decision to use Elon Musk, and they are deferring to Trump. All throughout this document, I will tell y'all, everything is like you ought to defer to the will of the president. Like that's the way it's written. Like and this is where, Julia, to your point about it's contradictory, right? So there's this one section that says the Congress has been ineffective and inefficient in the way they pass budgets, and that the government was designed to have three branches with checks and balances. And then the next sentence, it says, because it's been so inefficient, the executive office must take the control. And I'm like, it's strange. It's not, well, I shouldn't say it's strange. It's just contradictory that they're saying that it's at its best, it works this way, but since it can't work that way, we think we ought to do it in a way where we actually take total control over it. So, yeah.
One of the things I find the most insidious about it is like the ways in which, I know I already said, but that like these beliefs are presented as fact, that like, I feel like I know a lot of people that would read this and be like, no, I agree with all of this, but fully miss the point that like, right, but those are because those are your beliefs. Like, what if you don't believe these things? Like, what then? Like, what if this is not your culture and your perspective?
I do, to that point, Julia, I do want to name some of the things that I summarized that are just simply untrue, right? So the idea that 70% of Black children are being raised in unmarried households, that's not true. The idea that awareness of critical race theory and the existence of a social system of hierarchy based on race, gender, and gender identity and sexual orientation, that somehow causes moral degradation, that's not true. The idea that those things also are the roots of pornography, also not true. There is no evidence that race, gender identity, or sexual orientation, except for maleness, is a precursor or predictor of pedophilia or sexual addiction. The evidence shows us that the markers that make someone more, quote unquote, more likely, it's a correlation, not a causation, someone to be more likely to be a pedophile or a sexual predator is being a white male. So the idea that critical race theory or freedom for gender identity or freedom for sexual orientation leads to the spread of pedophilia, that is simply false. It is not true. And also the idea that outlawing abortion will actually reduce the need for abortion, increase birth rates, or increase the value of the family in American society is also not true. The implementation of Roe v. Wade and the freedom to access abortion has actually reduced teen pregnancy. It has reduced the number of abortions in the country, and it has actually created healthier outcomes for people who want to have children by pregnancy. So all of their pillars are based on, as Julia said, untruths. These are fabricated motivations. They are lies. And so I just want to make sure we clearly say that.
There was another one that I said that shook me. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. That's just not true. Like marriage in the context that they are speaking of it is a modern invention. Like we have existed, humanity, community, family far outdates the institution of marriage. That's a crazy thing to say. That's
far
like
outdates marriage as like two people in a legal binding economic relationship.
Yeah. What they mean, what they are talking about as marriage. That's the level of delusion in making that like saying that as a factual blows my mind.
Yeah, the majority of human history for relationships that have been consensual and have some legal binding have been polygamous, and that's just not not necessarily polygamous with one man and multiple women. It depends on if you're in a patriarchal or matriarchal society. And this is just like sociological facts. And so the claims that they're making, as Julia said, these are claims that that's why they don't have footnotes, because you can't provide evidence for this. It's vibes. It's based on vibes. It's like, well, our vibe is that this is true. I'm like, well, is it? No, it's actually not.
There's one more thing that I do think throughout this entire document, they label intellectual elites essentially as the enemy. A lot of this is about devaluing education. And one of the things in this promise is the reminder that schools serve parents, which blew my mind. That's like another insane thing to say to me. Because
can you tell me why it's insane, Julia? Not because I disagree with you. I agree with you.
Because to me, schools serve children.
Yes.
Who are people.
Because you need no qualifications to become a parent. So schools are the checks and balances on who has children in their community, like in their home. Schools are the place we make sure that those kids are going to be okay.
Right. The idea that schools exist to serve the agenda of the parents that we all know, especially in their world, anybody's a parent, whether they want to be or not. That the schools should be in service of them, that is terrifying to me. That shook me to my core.
Public education exists for children and for the good of society. But also to claim that parents don't have control over is also a falsehood. That's also a lie, because any parent can access their child at any time. They can access the curriculum. They can opt their children out of any lesson they want to. They have the right to observe whenever they would like to, within reason of the protection and safety of other children. And you have the right to address and change the curriculum with your school board. And also, you always have the choice to homeschool. You have the legal right to pull your children out of school as long as they are getting some kind of education. So the idea that parents don't have control over their children's education that's also just
another untruth.
Yeah, one of the last things I want to say in this section, then I'll turn it over to y'all, is just, I want to emphasize, I know we've talked a lot about whiteness in this, but I also think this is a deeply patriarchal document. And so in the same sentence, or just a few sentences after the quote or the sentence that Blair read about 7% of Black children are born to unmarried mothers, it goes on to say, fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. Again, no footnotes, just says it's fatherlessness. And I think, again, it's trying to paint this picture of the man as the savior, right, within the household. And that if you aren't married or if you don't have a male presence in the house, that these things happen. And again, there's multitudes of evidence that is contradictory to this. Particularly, I want to highlight research that's done by Harvard University that talks about single parent homes where the child is actually in full-time care with the mother. The parents who tended to be the least present were the white men. The parents who tended to be the most present were the Black men.
This is my favorite study of all time.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I
talk about it all the time.
Because it's so good. You're just like, even when they're not married, Black men are more present. And then Latino men were just like right there. Basically, they're basically the same.
That white men who live in the house are less likely to engage with their children than Black men who live separately from their children. Black men who live separately from their children are more likely to make dinner, change diapers, do bedtime, read stories, help with homework than any other demographic.
And
they don't
so
want to
all
talk
these,
about that.
Yeah, all these things are just they're myths, and they're made up to affirm an idea that one already has, that you've already believed before you started reading the document. And so again, now this is evidence we actually can provide. This is one of the institutions they're talking about. This is the study done by Harvard University.
Put it all in the show notes, baby.
And so I'm like, all this stuff is there, and yet again, they're choosing to not believe it. That's the last thing I want to say about this pillar. Is there anything else I want to say before we go on to promise number 2?
I mean, there's so much wrong in this pillar. Yeah. So yes, I feel like I mean, I think the idea of like fatherlessness as is one of the leading causes of rejection of the church. When weren't we just talking about a couple months ago about men returning to the church as this big old thing that was happening? It's like, where is this connection?
Families are more likely to go to church if mom brings them.
Correct. Yeah,
if
exactly.
Mom converts, whole families come to church. If dad converts, he comes by himself. That is a fact. Again, I will find another study. We'll put it in the show notes.
Absolutely. So that was crazy for me to read.
In my band, we laugh about the difference between Mother's Day and Father's Day. Like Mother's Day is like one of the busiest days at church.
Highest church attendance of the year is Mother's Day.
Everyone will come with mom, right? To make her happy. Father's Day is literally the opposite.
They all skip church.
Exactly. Like, oh, I guess you could watch the game at home instead of on your phone on this day. Like that's your gift. Like I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah. So just
move on to number 2.
Well, I want Wesley to get to finish his thought though.
Yeah, and some of the things here just like don't make any sense, because I think one of the things they write, some are obvious and longstanding goals like eliminating marriage penalties and welfare programs and the tax code and installing work requirements for food stamps. I don't understand how this gets people back to marriage and family, like work requirements. It's just an excuse to just do the thing they want to do and couch it in a larger frame of this is why it's good. It's just, I don't know, it's just so annoying.
Yeah. So one thing I want to say before we move on to number 2 is there are already work requirements for welfare. This happened in welfare reform under Clinton. And so that already exists. The idea of getting rid of marriage penalties actually, I think, can be to an extent a good thing. So for instance, like if you are disabled.
Especially for disability. Yeah.
Especially for disabled people. Like, I mean, so like that it's fine. And like, so I want to be clear. Like part of the reason I wanted to read so much of this is because I'm like, where do I see agreement that I think actually where they're making some good points. There's like, I think 3 places and if not 100 pages that I found, but they're there, Well, I mean, one, to be fair, they have some critiques of the administrative state, which I totally agree with, but also I think there are other leftists like me, like Ezra Klein, who's written about this as well, that we have too much bureaucracy and we need to figure out a way to actually deploy an administrative state in a way that's more strategically efficient, like you find in Germany, for instance, or Austria, other countries.
Contemporary Germany.
Yeah,
let's just clarify.
Contemporary Germany.
There's a lot of. We want to be careful and recognize which German government are we relating this government to.
That's fair. So there's a way in which you can actually have both, but they're not trying to do that. So anyway, so Blair, I'll turn it over to you to.
That's so we're going to kind of breeze quickly through Promise 2 and 3 because Promise 4 has so much rich theological reflection. So Promise 2 is to dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people, which we are seeing play out right now in their version, which is apparently to hand it to a bunch of college-age interns. But and number 3 is to defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. So the general summary around 2 is that the federal government is bloated, that spending bills, omnibus bills let crazy things get through, that essentially the federal government, in the way that they argue that it's taking power out of the hands of people when we create all these administrative bureaucracies, including things like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Education, and the health organizations, NHS. So basically saying that because those operate outside, like they make recommendations and impose penalties and create norms beyond Congress, that those things are not actually being governed by the American people. And then 3, to defend our nation's sovereignty, border, and bounty. This is where we get all of the stuff about imposing tariffs, reducing globalization, reducing like dependence on and access to international trade, the America First sort of economic policy. Also, that environmental extremism is one of the reasons that we can't have free trade the right way. It's both like stop trading with other countries, but also stop telling us we can't trade with other countries. Like, as Dr. Carter said, there's like contradictions in each section. And then, of course, to close the borders, that basically immigration is a problem for American sovereignty and American safety. So let's have at it. What do we think about their governmental recommendations for both internal function and sovereign quote unquote protection.
Well, I think one thing I wanted to point out is the premise of the document that's stated in the first full sentence. Where it says, of course, the surest way to put federal government back to work for the American people is to reduce its size and scope back to something resembling the original constitutional intent. And I think the part that's frustrating is they fail to recognize over and again that the constitutional intent, when you actually read the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, was to create a federal government that could work within 13 colonies. It's designed to work within 13 colonies. And it says it's supposed to be focused on this small group of people. It wasn't written in even an idea that it could actually become, that America could become what it has become with respect to its size and scope and the ways in which it reaches from, the Atlantic to the Pacific. And so I think that it is said in bad faith to say that the framers actually wanted a small government for the sake of small government. They wanted a government where people could be active and have a control in forging their own destiny because they believed that was possible within the scope of the 13, colonies. And so that, I think, fundamentally influences the way they're trying to write. And again, they're trying to cast this idea saying, well, this is what they wanted, this is what we ought to do. But these people, they were humans. They were men. They weren't gods, right? Like, just like, what if they're wrong? And that's okay if they're wrong, because again, like, sometimes people are wrong. So I just wanted to start by saying that is a false assumption to say that this is what they actually wanted. When in fact, I think you can make a stronger argument to say they wanted a more representative democracy than we actually have right now, which would require more people actually to be elected to office, not less.
Absolutely. I think it also, like that sentence that you read about back to something resembling the original constitutional intent, sort of like reifies this idea that the Constitution can't be changed. It can't evolve. It has to be that thing that existed whenever it was created, which is not how a functioning government should work. New things come to light. I think one of the things we've been having a problem with in Congress now is like digital privacy. Nothing that the Constitution can talk about because there wasn't a concept of digital when it was created. So like, we need to get away from this, like the Constitution is an unchanging, unmoving document, because that's not how societies grow. That's not how societies function and thrive.
It's unsurprising that they read the Constitution this way, because it's also how they read Scripture.
Read the Bible, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is how they read the Bible. So this kind of originalist and conservative, right? Like the root of conservative is to conserve. And so they're not just, they claim to be conserving the original words, but what they're actually trying to conserve is the original interpretation, or what they think the original interpretation is. But what they're not doing is looking at, as Dr. Carter just did, what was the context in which this was written? What was the actual historical circumstances in which this was speaking to? The same thing, one of my favorite anti-gun commercials. We should not have a favorite anti-gun commercial. I can't believe that phrase just came out of my mouth, but is that like the Second Amendment, right? Is this, it's in the Constitution. We have to be able to have guns. And someone made this commercial where a shooter comes into an office building with a musket. And after they shoot once, they have to reload with the thing and the gunpowder. And by then, everybody's out of the office. Like, the Second Amendment was created for muskets, not AK-47s. So if you're actually talking about, if you want to claim to be an originalist, then you have to pay attention to the historical context. But that's not how conservatives want to read the Constitution. It's also not how they want to read Scripture.
I'd be all for them saying that if you want to have a gun, you have to have a musket. I think we should go straight back to muskets. I think that would solve so many problems with respect to mass shootings. One place in this document that I do want to say, this is one of the places where I do agree with how they talk about the federal budget and how Congress allocates federal spending. This is something that I remember learning in undergrad, something I've had conversations with my friends who are in political policy. And I think it's important, but they don't actually talk about reforming it. They talk about working around it. In this paragraph of this says, consider the federal budget. Under current law, Congress is required to pass a budget and 12 issue-specific spending bills comporting with it every single year. The last time Congress did so was 1996. Congress no longer meaningfully budgets, authorizes, or categorizes spending. What they fail to talk about is why it stopped in 1996. And that's because you started having obstructionist Republicans, actually, like getting elected and doing their job. This is when Newt Gingrich and all of them got elected as a response to Bill Clinton, and they began to exert more, they became a party that was the of
Anarchists.
resistance. Yeah. Well, just a party of resistance. They're like, we will be the rather than obstructionist party, which is what the Democrat choose not to do. And so that's a part of the reason why it is a problem. So the way we do our budget spending is ineffective given the ways in which we want to govern. So unless we're willing to change that, we will continue to have the problems we have that ultimately impact all of us with respect to agricultural spending, with respect to medical spending, with respect to dealing with pandemics. Like all these things actually harm us, right? The ways in which we don't have enough money to hire enough air traffic controllers to then prevent the catastrophic accidents that we just had. Like it comes back to the way we allocate federal budget spending. And so that needs to change given the way we construct Congress. And so again, I want to say I agree with this. How they want to do it is wrong because they want to actually give the authority over to the president, more or less. I think that's not the correct way to do it, but they have identified a problem that I think is worth addressing.
But I think part of also that is the fact that, like, when you think about how much we spend on military spending when compared to the rest of the budget, it's like, well, yeah, we don't have, if you're going to claim that we don't have money for, aircraft controllers, because we're spending billions of dollars, trillions of dollars on maintaining this crazily effective and, aggressive military instead of making sure that people have what they need to thrive in their everyday lives.
But that's part of like, this to me is actually one of the most, a lot of this is just all terrifying. It's all terrifying. But one of the lines in it, the next conservative president must end the left's social experimentation with the military, restore war fighting as its sole mission, and set defeating the threat of the Chinese Communist Party as his highest priority. Like the idea of like that we should be in war, that the primary focus of our government should not just be supplying war, but should be actively using our military budget and our military to its fullest extent to fight war against other nations. That freaks me out.
Because it's not actually about reducing spending, right? It's about directing spending to the things they think are most important, to the detriment of the broader society.
Of the planet, right?
Yeah, and I think this gets to Julia, to your point about war. So, in the Pillar 3, where they talk about the fact that progressives, or I would argue general citizens, support the United Nations and the European Union. I'm like, yes, because these things were created literally to prevent war. Like that's why they were created, to have like the United Nations emergence, a version of it, the League of Nations emerges after World War I, because they needed to have a organization where elected officials from different governments, elected or if they were monarchies at the time, could actually come together and actually solve problems without going to war. Right? Because it's particularly with the proliferation of nuclear arms, like these things are essential. Like it is critical because we have the capacity to literally to destroy the planet. We have to find ways to actually work together, and declaring sovereignty and saying we don't have to work with you will aggravate other nations such that we actually can be moving ourselves closer towards a nuclear destruction rather than actually learning to cooperate and work together. And so again, to your point, Blair, it's like, they want to fund the things they want to fund. And so they see the military as war fighting rather than seeing the military as something we have to have, but a more strategic use of our money really could be found in cooperating with other nations rather than trying to bully them into doing what we want to do.
They do not believe in diplomacy, and they sneer at it. The other thing that's crazy is like the way that they use the word woke throughout this document,
throughout the whole document,
as like woke bureaucrats at the Pentagon force troops to attend, quote, training, end quote, seminars about, quote, white privilege, end quote. And bureaucrats at the State Department infuse U.S. foreign aid programs with woke extremism about, quote, intersectionality and abortion, end quote. As though I'm confused, like training and white privilege and intersectionality aren't real. Like what
they would claim it, they would call that indoctrination.
Right.
So they would say that those are made up ideologies when in reality they're based in massive amounts of scientific study.
Well, and also like the idea that diverse perspectives and ideas and values and like cultures are inherently wrong and bad. Ahistorical propaganda is being shoved down children's throats in public schools. Like, what are you talking about?
Because the only way white men maintain control is in a society where whiteness and patriarchal maleness are seen as inherently better than every other identity and way of being in the world. And so anything that threatens that false hierarchical moral structure is dangerous to them.
But that's what they are accusing the left of being. Like,
exactly. They're using the argument, they're they're using the actual reality of what they're trying to do and turning it around and claiming that the degradation of this hierarchical moral system is actually the danger, when in reality it's the implementation of a singular hierarchical monolithic thought that is dangerous. Because when you have privilege, equality feels like a threat.
It feels like oppression, right? Intellectual sophistication, advanced degrees, financial success, and all other markers of elite status have no bearing on a person's knowledge of the one thing most necessary for governance: what it means to live well. What are you talking about? What are you right?
For them to live well.
Like, what are you?
You actually
the rest
do need,
of us.
No, you do need education to actually understand how to live well.
What do you know about living well if you've, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, like you actually, this is, there's a excellent book called American Anti-Intellectualism, and it just describes the ways in which essentially what they're arguing right there is they're trying to say, oh, you don't actually have to go to school and learn anything. It's just this thing you should just know. You should have this intuitive knowledge. Again, this notion of common sense that emerges from, the norms of society, which we know how the norms of society have been
Thomas
shaped.
Paine and Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah. And so this is again a fundamental flaw, like a fundamental flaw throughout the entire document. It's making the assumption. Well, I guess I want to pull back a little bit before we hop into number 4, because I know 4 is actually the theological one. They claim to be speaking for and about the common man, and they will use that term, the common man, right, with respect to the people who wrote the Project 2025. But in fact, they actually are not those people. So one of the things they have in here, it says, today, nearly every top-tier U.S. university president or Wall Street hedge fund manager has more in common with a socialist European head of state than with the parents of a high school football game in Waco, Texas. First, I don't necessarily know that that's true, but it's not the problem isn't the fact they don't have things in common, right? And so what they're trying to create this false binary of saying, well, if you don't understand these people in Waco, Texas that are attending a high school football game, you can't be a university president. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And at the same time, you want the university president to have a particular skill set to know how to run a university. Like, that's what they need to know how to do. That parent at Waco, Texas, they may be, I don't know what they may be doing. Like, maybe they're a doctor. Maybe they're literally a surgeon. But a surgeon doesn't have the skill set to be to run an institution at a school, or a hedge fund manager. And so again, they create these false dichotomies to create these false divisions that aren't, that A, they don't have any evidence to say that's for, but also B, they're trying to say that they're trying to argue for this uniformity rather than unity. Maybe that's what I'm trying to, better what I'm saying. They're trying to say, according to what Paul would say, like in 1 Corinthians, where Paul's talking about how the body has multiple parts, they're trying to make us all a foot, right? Rather than saying, actually, you got lots of different parts. And or I don't know, man.
We're all just one foot.
We're just one big foot, right? Like, but we're actually not, like, we all have different parts for different things to do different. And that diversity actually represents the glory of God, in my mind, right? The fact that we have this beautiful diversity represents the ways in which God created all of this and called it good and called it beautiful. And they're trying to make it all the same, or at least think the same.
Be one of the good things about the United States is it should be the fact that we are a nation of immigrants and the descendants of enslaved people and Native
indigenous
people.
peoples. Yeah.
Right. Like it should be that we all get to build this together, but like that's not what they're into. And I know I keep calling them filthy hypocrites, but like it is not lost on me that this man is like over here talking trash about, and he himself, he did not go Ivy, but like all the people on his board did. Like, I don't know, I didn't check, but like JD Vance certainly did. Yeah. Like, don't sit here while you're trying to like take away the ability for people who are not only and specifically like you to attend Ivy League schools, like, and then also say that the people that go there are trash and shouldn't be in government when you in fact are those people. The other thing that spooked me was talking about the idea of environmental activism as anti-human.
Can I read this passage? Because I did want to hit this before we move to section 4. And friends, this is going to be a long podcast, but I think it's worth it. I think all of this is worth it. So hang in there with us, okay? This phrase, this section on page 11 says it's talking about open borders and then environmentalism. But as Dr. Carter said, the idea of government and especially international governance is that we can do things together that none of us can do alone, right? But by working together, we are able to accomplish things that. Anyway, okay, this quote, page 11. Open borders activism is a classic example of what the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called cheap grace, publicly promoting one's own virtue without risking any personal inconvenience. Indeed, the only direct impact of open borders on pro-open borders elites is that the constant flow of illegal immigration suppresses the wages of their housekeepers, landscapers, and busboys. Commentary as if that's the only thing immigrants can be, but that's a side note. Keeps going. Cheap grace. I'm so angry they're using the words of Bonhoeffer. Cheap grace aptly describes the left's love affair with environmental extremism. Those who suffer most from the policies environmentalism would have us enact are the aged, poor, and vulnerable. Commentary. Poor people and people of color suffer from lack of environmental protections more than anyone else. End commentary. Quote, it is not a political cause, but a pseudo-religion meant to baptize liberals' ruthless pursuit of absolute power in the holy water of environmental virtue. At its very heart, environmental extremism is decidedly anti-human. End quote.
And can I add one more thing to the end of that? Because the thing that spooked me the most is at the end of that paragraph, it says, they, being liberals, would stand human affairs on their head, regarding human activity itself as fundamentally a threat to be sacrificed to the God of nature. The implication being that nature itself is not like that, not creation.
Not made by God, not made good.
Is
the theological twisting in this section.
Just loop-de-loops.
As if the ability for nature to thrive doesn't directly impact human society.
As though humans exist to rule in dominion over nature itself.
Or that humans exist outside of nature.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And so
on top of.
There's two things I want to say here. And one, I know Blair may have more to say than me, but the misinterpretation of Bonhoeffer's definition of cheap grace is ridiculous. That is not what Bonhoeffer
is. Truly appalling. Truly appalling.
That is not what Bonhoeffer is talking about with cheap grace. Like Bonhoeffer is drawing a distinction between what he calls cheap grace and costly grace. Cheap grace are what I will call, like, if you remember the Staples commercials from back in the day, for those of you who are older, when you could press this easy button and then all of a sudden, like, it made everything magically happen. When you went to Staples, you hit this easy button and all the stuff that you need to do for your office supplies were fixed. That was Bonhoeffer's notion of cheap grace. People would say that they claim to be followers of Jesus, and they would ask for forgiveness, and they would be forgiven, and didn't require them to actually make any fundamental changes in the way they engaged with each other and engaged in the world. It didn't require anything of them. Their Christianity didn't require anything of them. Costly grace was the awareness and recognition that to claim Jesus as your Lord, right, to claim Christianity as the religion you practice, is to necessarily say you must actually actively change to serve, like to actually be in service not only to others, but to your neighbor, and recognize that requires some kind of cost to you, right? Because you have to share. Like, you can't be selfish, right? It has a fundamental cost. But Blair may have more to say on that than me. The thing I do, or do you want to say anything more, Blair?
This section has me so angry, I don't even think I have words yet. honestly.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you guys keep going.
All right. The one thing that I will speak to as now, I will. It's weird because I try to be a humble person. I try to to recognize my humility. I will speak to this as an expert. I am an expert in environmentalism. Like, this is what I do. People, like, I have written books on it. I go to conferences on this. Everything in that paragraph Blair read is patently false. Like, actually, the people who are most harmed by climate change actually are people who are the aged and the poor and the vulnerable. Actually, the aged are disproportionately impacted. So if you go back to what happened with Hurricane Katrina or what happened with the most recent hurricanes in North Carolina, anytime you have an environmental disaster, people who live in these elderly homes, elderly care homes, those are the ones who almost always get left behind or even forgotten. This is
We
not
saw
just
that in the fires here in LA. That trying to
And the
evacuate
disabled.
care homes, nursing homes were some of the most complicated evacuations to save them from the impending fire.
And so so it's just a lie. Like I'm saying, it's fundamentally wrong. Like, the people who actually suffer more from ecological collapse are actually, again, the old, the elderly, the poor, and those who would be actually most vulnerable. So in this sense, this isn't about a kind of pseudo religion. It's recognizing that human beings actually are created beings, right? Like, this is prioritizing, perhaps one might say, even the second creation narrative, looking at the second creation narrative and saying we actually are Adamah, like we come from the earth, like we all are made of the same substance, and God breathed life into all of us, right? So what does it mean to actually see us, to recognize the ways in which human beings can only flourish if the environment flourishes, and that we can't exploit nature's resources for our own good, because ultimately that does us harm. And so, again, I say this as someone who has significantly more expertise than anyone who wrote anything in this document with respect to environmentalism, because that's what I can actually claim, because that's what I actually do. I know, as Blair said, we are going long, so I want to make sure we at least get to the
We
last
gotta
pillar
do Promise
before.
4.
So,
do you want to summarize it, Dr. Carter? Or you want me to try?
I can. Well, I'm just going to read it because I think it's pretty straightforward. Where basically it says, "Promise 4: secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty." And I kind of already hit my critiques on this, because what they're trying to make the argument is that this notion of the pursuit of happiness is fundamental to what it means, honestly, to even be a Christian. That this notion of pursuit of happiness, they translate to say, well, it could be understood as the pursuit of blessedness, and then they say that an individual must be free to live as the creator ordained to flourish. But their notion of flourishing, the notion of blessedness, the notion of happiness, to Julia's point, is all constrained within this particular kind of moral framework that prioritizes one vision of the world as the absolute truth and not any other vision of the way community and relationship ought be. And I think this is, again, a part of the problem. I would argue that, to broadly speaking, I'd agree with him. We are created to flourish, but let's tease out what we mean by flourishing. And their notion of flourishing is much more about this authoritative hierarchical regime rather than actually asking people, what do you need to flourish, right? Not prioritizing, like it says, for instance, what they want to argue. The pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, Thanksgiving dinners, and the like, right? Like that's not necessarily what is the good life for people, right? Like, one might say that's a part of the good life, but community is a part of the what might say is a good life. Work is a part of what actually might be a good life. Like, there are multiple other things that need to be considered. Not having access to healthcare, having access to education, like, having your basic needs met. Like, these are actually what people need to flourish and have a good life. And they are not including these things that I would argue are actually required from a theological perspective, right? With respect to what Jesus says, not only in his sermon in Luke 4, where he's actually preaching about what we ought to do, quoting the passages in Isaiah, whether it be Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount. Like, there's all these scriptural sources we can draw from to say that we have responsibilities to make sure the least of these are taken care of. And that actually is what flourishing looks like. And yet they tend to ignore all of that with their notion of God-given, right?
Well, they also twist and turn. They, like, every sentence is the opposite of what you just said. So they say, quote, "Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought." End quote. Okay, I guess. And then the next page, Page 14, they say, we don't need them meaning the liberal elites, to tell us how to live. It's this inalienable right of self-direction, of each person's opportunity to direct himself or herself and his or her community to do the good that the ruling class disdains. You just said that we don't get to do what we want, we get to do what we ought. But now you're talking about self-determination? Like, make up your mind. You filthy hypocrite. Just make up your mind.
Wait. We gotta call them filthy. They may be clean hypocrites, but they're hypocrites, right? We could say that. The paragraph that stood out to me that I want to read, because this is the paragraph that is just a lie. This is just fundamentally a lie. It's two paragraphs after one you just read, or one paragraph. It says, quote, left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism, just as we rejected slavery, second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today wokeism. To the left, these assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority, proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite to make decisions for us, right? Like, literally, again, it goes back and forth, Julia, to what you just said. They're saying we need to have individual freedom, but actually we need a ruling elite. But moreover, it's making the assertion, like, in what history book are they reading that American people rejected colonialism and slavery and second-class citizenship for women? I'm like, women had to fight tooth and nail to have.
They're literally right now trying to take it away right now as we speak.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. People rejected European monarchy because it meant they couldn't themselves
be the monarchs,
be in power, right? So American founders rejected European monarchy because they wanted control themselves, not because there was something implicitly wrong with being a monarch in their minds. They did not reject colonialism. We repeated colonialism, but we did it by the market, not by the government. And then we aligned the government with it to put military bases all over the world in the places where we felt the economy needed to be controlled most. Then we did not reject slavery. We fought a flipping war over it that killed more Americans than any other war in history. We did not reject second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, or socialism. We absolutely continue to oppress women, and we are prioritizing the needs of the market over the needs of the people. And we're not rejecting socialism. Actually, the majority of Americans, if you survey them, want more socialist policies. And we also want more access to international trade and free movement, which is Wilsonian globalism. We are trying to reject fascism, but we haven't done it. We elected a fascist. And we haven't rejected communism because we are aligned in this environmental or governmental structure with Putin, who is a communist. So, yes, I agree. I don't know what history book they're reading. It's absolutely insane.
What history
for anyone who has actually studied the events of American
of history
life.
What reality are you living in right now when they're like talking about North Korea and like a psychotic dictator and his cronies run the we're doing that here right now as well. Like that's a psychotic dictator and his cronies. What's happening?
It's like the things that they set out to sort of like articulate as these are the next moves that the next conservative president needs to make are exactly the things that they're saying that we're against. But at the same time, that whole list of things that we've done, that society or whatever, they're just making themselves a hero in this narrative. Because it's how they continue to keep doing this and make people feel like they can be aligned. Like, oh yeah, we did end slavery. You're like, no, you're forgetting how it happened.
Yeah, I think that we have done a sufficient job articulating.
Well, the last thing. Can I say one more thing about this section?
Oh no, yeah, I was gonna let it say one more. Yeah, please go ahead.
The last thing about this section is that when they're talking about liberty for all, when they're talking about the pursuit of happiness, they are not actually talking about. And it goes straight back to this idea that we rejected European monarchy. We did not. What they are wanting is not liberty for all. They are wanting the liberty to oppress. They are wanting the liberty to be in absolute power and control over other people. And the fact of the matter is they consider anything that restricts the rights of white men to be in control as a danger. That's what all of this is feeding. They do not actually want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all Americans. They want it for people who look and sound like them.
And they have laid out an agenda to help them accomplish this. And this is kind of what I
And they're
wanted to
doing
end
it.
on. And that's what I was going to. So one of the things in that they call the 180-day like game plan, action plan or whatever, is what they're doing. And so one of the, that they outline actually in promise number 2 that they're doing, I'll say briefly about in the section that they write on the executive branch, is it says, quote, the conservative promise lays out how to use many of these tools, including how to fire supposedly, quote unquote, unfireable federal bureaucrats, how to shutter wasteful and corrupt bureaus and offices, how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government, how to restore American people's constitutional authority over the administrative state, and how to save untold taxpayer dollars in the process. This is what they're having Elon Musk do. This is what they're trying to do through these different executive orders and memos, is they're trying to find ways to subvert the actual people who are honestly the oil that makes our country function. A lot of the people that are in these unelected offices, they're not ideologically aligned. They just have jobs, just like anybody else has a job. But what they want is they want people in every possible position that they can have to be ideologically aligned with the president, because they believe the president actually sets the agenda and everybody has to fall in line behind the president, right? And so again, they're on one hand saying we don't want people to have ideology, but on the other hand, they're saying actually, if you're going to have an ideology, it should be the ideology of the president. And this is where you have to see the trying to magic trick they're trying to do with how they're writing. And this is exactly what's happening. Like, this is what they're trying to do in the section or they describe how to do in chapter 1, where it says White House office. Is written by Rick Dearborn, who is still involved with the White House as we speak. And they describe essentially how to create the structure within the White House to actually implement these policies within 2 years, so that they can functionally organize the government in such a way that after 2 years, even if we flip, like the progressives flipped the House and the Senate, that the executive branch will still have so much authority. They have consolidated, created kind of a legal, more or less fascism, that they won't be able to lose. They will still be able to maintain power. That this is what I think they mean when they say when they see Trump as king. When they don't want to govern, they want to rule. And by doing this, and by changing the administrative state, by disentangling and undoing the ways in which government has historically operated, they're able to create a government that they can control even when they're not in office. And this is the part that's scary for me. And so I know this episode is a scary episode. I'm not even, but I think part of the reason we needed to talk about this is we need to know what we're up against to be able to take it legitimately seriously, because they are serious. They are organized. They are prepared. And this is what they are doing. If you don't have the ability to read this document because it will drive you crazy, don't read it. Honestly, I think we did a pretty good job summarizing it. I thought we might even cover more, but we're so angry we weren't able to get to it. But I do know that there are some things in here that we will pull out as we see, that I know I will pull out as I see actually happening. And that's why I mentioned the ways in which they're firing people, because that's what's actually happening right now, that they have created pathways if they're trying to do that. So in order to end not so depressing, at least maybe let's spend a couple of minutes. If there's anything, I know we just had the Grammys. We just had Kendrick Lamar, I think, do the troll of all trolls.
Oh my God.
Yes, incredible.
Wearing his
wearing
all
a Canadian
tuxedo.
Is Drake okay? Has anyone checked on Aubrey Graham this week? Because I feel for that man. Like, I was like, I'm embarrassed for you. Oh no, are you okay? Because the whole crowd in that room singing A minor, I was like, oh,
yeah,
Aubrey.
It's not good. It's not good. It's not
I would not be okay. Beyonce, finally.
Album of the year, finally.
Well deserved.
Did she win country artist as well?
She sure did. She's
Yep,
the first
taking over the world
artist. She's had one best album of the year in 5 different categories. That's crazy.
The joy. I am just watching Little Chapel Roan over and over and over again. Her performance of Pink Pony Club was just so life-giving as a person who was like, my faith, my life was formed by the freedom and joy of queer people. And so to see her perform with so much joy, I just keep going back to it. So that's been really feeding me.
Cynthia singing Fly Me to the Moon for me was like, was also very healing.
I think that Chapel Roan used her acceptance speech to call out the industry in support of developing artists. I think is exactly the type of things that people who have power and a voice should be doing, to call out these structures that abuse and oppress other people. Yes. I thought Doechie's performance was incredible.
Yes.
Just like
never misses.
Oh yeah, it was. I had a good time watching it.
Just a good reminder that art helps us resist. Art gives us energy when we're facing difficult things. Art helps us to learn and to understand in ways that sometimes intellectualism cannot. So a celebration of art, our artists, and continuing to look to them, lean on them, celebrate them, and be artists ourselves in the midst of all of this heaviness.
Word.
Yeah, while y'all were enjoying yourselves, I was probably reading this crazy document because I said that's what I was gonna do, and so I chose it. I did it to myself. I'm gonna watch it.
We're gonna send you our favorite moments, Dr. Carter.
I know. I'm gonna watch it
with us.
I'm gonna have to rewatch it because I know it was great. I know it was great. So, well, I want to thank y'all for listening, for hanging with us. Actually, honestly, I want to thank you for hanging with us and listening. For joining us for the Progressive Christian Podcast. If you'd like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on Instagram at The Progressive Christians and on TikTok at The Progressive Christians. Again, please rate, review, share the show. Honestly, if there's someone that you think might really enjoy the way in which we engage in this conversation, some person of faith, some person who's political but slightly religious or spiritual, please share the show with them so that we can continue to expand our influence and really hopefully be able to subvert what's happening within our current government right now, so we can actually do the work that God has called us to do and actually help create the beloved community. That's what ultimately we're trying to argue for and trying to do with this podcast. So thank you all for listening, and we will see y'all later. Bye.
Bye.